This is Talking Saints, the official St. Patrick's Athletic podcast with myself, Jamie Moore. I'm very happy to be joined by Dermot Looney from History St. Pat's. Dermot, how are you?
Very well, Jamie.
Thanks for coming on. Now, 80 years ago this Wednesday, St. Patrick's Athletic won their first senior trophy. And Dermot had a really interesting piece in the Saint match programme for the Derry match last week. So he's jumping on to give us the story behind this anniversary. And the headline reads, 1940-41, the year we won the Cup for the first time. Just 10 years in competitive football, 1940-41 was when St. Patrick's Athletic sprang to national prominence for the first time. Dermot, tell me the story.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jamie. This is the year when Pats won the FAI Junior Cup, and I think a lot of people who have played football at a junior level, like myself anyway, that's about as far as you can ever strive. It's a massive competition even still. They've often talked about it as being one of the biggest football competitions in Europe. Hundreds of clubs enter it every year. And so this year, 40-41, Pats won that FAI Junior Cup, and it is a remarkable story because it's a team that was only on the go about 10 years. Several of the players who had founded the club played in the first match in the Phoenix Park just 10 or 11 years before it, were playing in that cup final in Dalymount Park and lifted that FAI Junior Cup. So it's the first time, as I said in that article, that Pats ever came to national prominence. They'd won a couple of important competitions before. They were in Leinster, the Leinster League Division 2, which is kind of the third flight of Irish football at that stage. So you had the Leinster League Division 1, which we now call the Leinster Senior League. The Pats were the division below that, Leinster League Division 2. They had won it, but they weren't promoted for some reason. So they were in that kind of third flight. That was kind of one of the higher levels of junior football. So it wasn't a shock that they won this. They were a very decent junior team. But it was the first time that they got into the final. It's the first time they progressed well in the competition. The first time they won it. And it really kick-started an incredible decade, the 1940s for St. Pat's, when they went on to play intermediate football in that Leinster Senior League and become a huge name in Irish football and really banging on the door of the League of Ireland. So this was the start of it all in the 1940s.
And just to put this into some sort of, the timeline and the context of it, Dermot, this is going on in the middle of World War II.
Yeah, right in the middle of World War II. So there's all sorts of restrictions on. I mean, as someone doing a bit of research on this, one of the things that strikes me is the newspapers get really short around now because there's such a shortage of newsprint. So it's very difficult to find match reports for lots of games and team lineups and so on, because the Evening Herald sometimes is only 2 pages long or 4 pages long at the time. And there's a lot going on in Dublin. Ireland is obviously neutral in the war, but the North is not neutral as part of the UK. And in fact, the day after this cup final was the notorious Belfast Blitz. There were 1,000 people killed in bombs dropped by the Luftwaffe. So all of this is going on around us. John Betjeman, the English poet, was like an attaché, a media attaché in Dublin at the time, and he wrote that, his report from Dublin was there was no coal, no petrol, no gas, no electric, no paraffin, but the Guinness was good. So there wasn't a lot going on in the country at the time in terms of entertainment for people. The wireless was very much restricted, what could be said on the radio. The newspapers themselves were cut down, books were heavily censored and so on. So football and sport was very much an important entertainment aspect of people's lives. And even junior football, what we now still call junior football. And some of the match reports I have from around the time, they rarely mention attendances, but 1 or 2 I have mentioned attendances of 3,000 and 4,000 at junior football matches. We'd be delighted with that in Richmond Park when we get things going back now. So football is important to the people going on. And what's interesting, just talking about context, is again that same week there was a baby born in County Limerick to John and Alice Higgins. And he's a big League of Ireland fan now. He's the president of Ireland, so he's also born that same week. So a good week for Pats and a good week for the country, but of course a terrible week in terms of what was happening in the war and all of these things happening around at the time. And of course the workers of the CIA, what was then the GSR, worked, who were the Pats fans. Many of the players worked there. They were all over the place in terms of trying to deal with shortages of coal and so on. So a huge amount of things going on in the country at the time. Football was a great distraction for people.
Yeah, there's a fantastic photo as well of the team with the trophy and the managers and etc. that is in the Saint, and it's on stpatsfc.com. The match programme for the season so far anyway, and for the games before the crowds come back is free. to download as a PDF on the website. So if you haven't seen the photo, go and have a look at it, because it's really, really interesting. And that's what I wanted to ask you next, Dermot, just in terms of, you mentioned at the time, the newspapers were almost, 1, 2, 3 pages at times. For you to find all this information, and, in the Saint, you have the run to the final, you have the goal scorers, you have the results. Like, how do you go about actually looking back 80 years in the middle of World War II to actually find this information and make sure it's accurate and then put it into print for people to read and stuff?
Yeah, it is a case of just going through newspaper archives. For me, we do have a couple of photos and so on archives in the club. Pat O'Callaghan, many people know, has kept some great archives as best as he could. He would have talked to a man who played such an important role in this cup run, one of our founder members, a man called Des Dempsey, and Des gave him that photo, which I've colorized there, and we have the original of that photo, the black and white. But we do have match reports, but they're very limited, except for the final. And what's interesting is we get the match report for the final. There is a short report in the Irish Press, in the Evening Herald. It's a big game of football, but the big match report we get is from the Connacht Tribune newspaper for the final that took place against Galway Bohemians. Yes,
and it's fair to say the reporter for that newspaper didn't pull his punches when he was criticising how bad he felt the Galway Bohemians played. He said they played the wrong type of game and lost. He also said their lack of enterprise with everything to gain was pathetic. And it's very rare in this day and age for a journalist to say pathetic about a football match. So it's really interesting just to read some of the things that were being said around that final. And again, in the Saints, you can look at the run to the final itself. But you might talk us through the business end of that competition, Dermot. And of course, it was in a season where St. Pat's had finished joint top of the league, but ended up finishing second or third because there was like a playoff system, which they lost, which was also interesting and strange and certainly wouldn't happen in this day and age. But they went on then to end the season with that trophy.
Yeah, the league finished. They finished level on points with Grange Gorman and Home Farm. Home Farm were a very, very big club, even in those days too. And instead of, they didn't do goal difference, they sometimes did something called goal average, but not in this particular competition. So Pats unfortunately didn't win the league that particular season. In the cup, they did a decent run. In some of the earlier rounds, they had some, 4-1 win. They played their great rivals GSR in the third round. GSR were the railway works team from Inchicore, so it's an Inchicore derby. And in fact, Pats very likely kind of were a split away from that GSR club. They also played Home Farm in that FAI Junior Cup run. But getting to the semi-final, they played Rockville, beating them 3-2. I think Rockville, there is a team called Rockville from Cork, but I think this was possibly the team from Blackrock in Dublin. One of the great goal scorers during this is a guy, as I've mentioned his name, Des Dempsey. Often took penalties and free kicks. He was actually a half-back. Now, a half-back is more of a midfielder. He didn't play as a defender as such, but he has a great scoring record in this Junior Cup run, as well as a guy called Lanigan, who was the right winger. Lanigan, if I'm not mistaken, had played a couple of seasons in goal for St. Pat's and went on to be our top scorer in this particular season. The goalkeeper this time was a guy called Wall. So they got to the final and played Galway Bohemians, great junior club at the time from the West. The final was played in Dalymount Park. It was an Easter Monday. And Pats won at 2-0. And as those match reports show, it wasn't the best game. The Pats goals were scored by Harry Markey, who was a great left winger for Pats, and went on to play another season before retiring. I think later on became a referee. And Brogan, who was he scored the other goal. Again, a very good forward, scored many goals for Pats around that period of the late 30s into the 40s. And they won it well. But, some of the players, as I said, some of those players were some of the original team who played for Pats in 1930 in the first season. So the likes of Des Dempsey, the likes of one or two other players as well. Martin Morgan was the captain who lifted the cup, and Martin Morgan, that family still they're still Saints fans. His grandson or his grandnephew, and they're still involved in the club. Morgan was another half-back as well. He very decent kind of defensive player. And again, someone associated very much with the CIE work. So he worked in repairing trains at the time. His father was an engine driver. His brother, who was a founder member of the club, Paddy Morgan, was in the running shed as well. And you had some other great players on that team as well. You had a guy called Joe O'Rourke, not the Joe O'Rourke many Pats fans will know now, who's our program designer. But this Joe O'Rourke was an inside left, so, just inside the winger in the forwards. And he went on to play League of Ireland football, as did Des Dempsey. They both went to the same club after this. So Des Dempsey went the following season to Bray Unknowns, who were the forerunners to Bray Wanderers. He was meant to have signed for Shamrock Rovers in the League of Ireland, and we have some letters to say that, but for some reason went to Bray Unknowns and played in the league, as did O'Rourke the following season. So, these were high-quality footballers who ended up getting, paid part-time wages and played in the League of Ireland. But this junior team, to succeed, it was such a big achievement for a team who had literally climbed all the way from the lowest level of junior football to now be on top of junior football. And only a couple of years later, Pats would win again that Leinster League Division 2, go up to the top division of the Leinster Senior League and dominate that in the late 1940s.
Yeah, and one thing as well, you notice from looking at the photo that hasn't changed in 80 years is the trophy and the type of trophy it is. Even now, if you win a league or win a cup or whatever, the trophies are very, very similar, and the photo of all the players and the old football, but the trophy sitting in the middle is, they haven't really changed over the years. And if that is somewhere, I'm not sure if the trophy is still with the club or if it whatever happened to it, but it's something that hasn't probably changed over the years too much.
That's still the FAI Junior Cup trophy. That's still the trophy that's awarded now. The likes of Sheriff and so on who've been winning that in recent years. It's still the trophy, and you can see there's little plaques on it, and you can see the different teams who won it. So St. Patrick's Athletic, 40-41. Like the Junior Cup itself has connections to Richmond as well. The first team to win that Junior Cup were a team called Brideville, and they went on to become the first League of Ireland team to play in Richmond Park, and they beat Cove Ramblers in the first final. So that's another League of Ireland club. Athlone Town, Home Farm, Sligo Rovers as well were FAI Junior Cup winners. So it shows you can use that as a platform to go towards senior football, and it certainly helped us do that and lead to that extraordinary decade, because of course 10 years later, after winning that, Pats were eventually admitted to the League of Ireland and won it at their first attempt.
Who was the manager of this team, like the first St. Pat's manager ever to win a senior trophy? And of course, for all the research you've done over the years about all the different managers who've won leagues and cups and managed the team in massive matches, but back then there was a man who was going to lead the club to the first ever senior trophy.
Well, there wasn't, is the extraordinary thing, Jamie. What? So there was a selection committee as how the team was picked. So usually picked by 3 people. We have some kind of minutes of meetings. So they would have a weekly meeting, and maybe at the end of that meeting they would pick the team. By the way, it was nearly always the same team week in, week out. And they did have trainers. They had trainers. They had masseuses and so on. Famously later in the 40s, Willie McCormick became that kind of role for Pats. But at the time, there were various different people doing that kind of off-field work. So you had the chairman and you had the committee doing the picking of the teams. Luckily, we've moved a little bit away from that in football now, although they obviously got it right with this team.
That's interesting. Was that a stupid thing for me to say, or was that like I just didn't know that back then that's how football management was done? Like, it seems actually so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so some teams were beginning to get managers, I think, at this stage, and certainly they would have trainers, and that was the phrase that was very often used, and they had coaches and so on, and they would have trained. Pats usually, I think, trained on Tuesdays and Thursdays in those seasons, because they put the ads for training in the paper sometimes. But they didn't have a single individual manager, and we've seen managers become much more important in football as the years have gone on. But Pats really started having managers in the League of Ireland era. Before that, it was mainly selection committees, it seems, that picked the teams. Wow,
fascinating stuff. And yeah, that's just really, really interesting, I must say. And in those days as well, like, it was, really small squads. We see now that, you can have 11 starters and 9 subs and make 5 subs. And now you've these new rules to do with head injuries and the concussion and stuff. But back then it was the kind of smaller squads. I think I can see 13 players in the photo with the trophy.
Yeah, although one thing that Pat started around this time, I'm not sure if it's this exact year or not, is really developing as a club. They'd occasionally had a B team, and that there were no subs, of course, in those days either. So injuries, you just go down to 10 men or often 9 men in games, and there was no subs at all permitted. But for a club like Pats, they would have had a reserve team on and off during this time, to give some of the kind of fringe players a run out. But what we saw around kind of the early 1940s as well for the first time was a minor team, so an underage team. So that's the first time Pats bring that in. Schoolboy football wasn't as well developed as it later became in Dublin, but Pats had a minor team, including, I believe, Timber Cummins, who was a great star for Pats in the early 50s in the League of Ireland era. And so that came in around this same kind of period. And they started having B teams, schoolboy teams, and indeed minor, which was under 18 around this time as well. And in fact, the minor team, which we now call kind of under 18, went on to win the FAI Youth Cup. It was called the FAI Minor Cup in those days, a couple of years after this Junior Cup. So, we had in the 40s, winning the FAI Junior Cup was the start of it, but going on to win that FAI Minor Cup, the FAI Intermediate Cup, which is a very substantial competition, and perhaps most famously of all for that period, Pats won in 47 the Leinster Senior Cup, the first of our Leinster Senior Cup wins as a non-league team.
Yeah, and just on that, the headline of the piece reads, the year we won the cup for the first time. In the previous, 9 or 10 years from when the club had been founded, I suppose, was there many league trophies in the smaller leagues when they were starting off, and I suppose the path to eventually winning kind of a big one as such?
Yeah, absolutely. They were really successful as a club. I keep reiterating how low they started in football. So they were playing in the 15 acres in the Phoenix Park. The first season was called the Intermediate League, but it was kind of a youth league, but at a very low level. And they went from that straight into the AUL Division 3, which they won, the AUL Division 2, which they won, and the AUL Division 1, which they eventually won, and went into the Leinster Senior League, or Division 2 of the Leinster Senior League as it was. And along with that, plenty of cup victories, including their first couple of years where they won doubles. And the major competition they'd won before this was called the Leinster Junior Cup, which I think still exists, and was a significant one at the time. But to win the FAI Junior Cup, it's in all the national papers. People are getting to know the name of St. Patrick's Athletic, and the players are making a name for themselves too, and that's why some of them are able to go on and play League of Ireland football. And there are, I'm sure, unfortunately, there probably aren't many fans around at this stage who remember that, but I think it's a really important cup win. It's much more important even than some of the league wins we had at that stage, because it puts us to national prominence, and it gives the team and the club a platform to build on, which they do in the 40s. They really put a lot of money in, a lot of fundraising work to build what eventually becomes a League of Ireland club.
Lastly, the last part of the piece, the programme, talks about that man Lanigan, who I'm not even sure if he has a first name in the piece, but that he finished the season as top scorer with at least 34 goals. And you mentioned earlier on that it seems he began his St. Pat's career as a goalkeeper. So again, a unique story. I'm not sure if there's much more about this guy Lanigan, but to go from being a keeper to scoring 34 in a season in which the team won the cup for the first time isn't a bad turnaround.
Yeah, and I'm not 100% sure of that because we're going on surnames, but I have seen one or two pictures and they're a bit grainy, but I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. So he played for 2 seasons in goal for Pats. Then Wall comes in as the goalkeeper, and I'm pretty sure Lanigan goes out and plays on the right wing. Happy to be corrected if anyone knew, and we have lots of relatives of these players still around as fans of the club. But it was it wasn't a totally unique story. I've come across this a couple of times in the archives that we had outfielders go in goal for a season, or goalkeepers come out and play outfield, even towards the League of Ireland era as well. And one or two other players to note, and someone who's in that photograph is the great Jem Cummins, or Jimmy, or Jems or Cummins. And one of the many Cummins who played for Pats. They were a great family right from the start of the football club, both in terms of on the field. So his brother Tommy was also an important Pats player. Their cousin Timber Cummins went on to be an absolute star for Pats. But that family is still around today. And I think he won something like 13 medals at Pats or something like that. He had an extraordinary career. I don't think he played too much that season. He certainly didn't score as much as he previously had done. But he's in that photo, and they were remarkable, those guys who set up the team, the likes of Martin Morgan, the captain, the likes of Desi Dempsey, to go on and win that FAI Junior Cup from where they'd come was an extraordinary achievement.
Dermot, anything else on that? Or are we? I think we've gone through the piece and loads of good information. Is there anything else that jumps out before we finish?
Not at all. Just to say again, Jamie, I mean, this is a time of anniversary, so it's also the anniversary of our very famous second cup win in 1961. I think it's also the 90th anniversary of our first cup win, which is the Haroldville Cup, which we won in that first season. And of course, 25 years since we won an amazing league title in 95, 96. But you might talk to someone else who knows a bit more about it than me.
Yes, we will. On the podcast in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be focusing on that 95, 96 anniversary as well. So yeah, loads of anniversaries for this time of year, and that's one of them. The first cup win, and there's a really good piece, as I mentioned a couple of times in the programme. It's in the Saint. You'll find it on stpatsfc.com. You can read the whole programme, every home game as a PDF, some unbelievable stuff in it and loads of great stuff from Dermot as well, including that piece on the anniversary we were speaking about, which is 80 years on Wednesday of this week. Podcast is coming out on Tuesday, so it's a good time to have a listen to that as well. And if people want more History St. Pat's, Dermot, they can find it on Twitter at History St. Pat's.
That's it, yeah. And if people have, that family background, I'd be always delighted to receive, pictures or stories or anything they might have.
Great stuff, Dermot. Thanks a million. Chat to you soon.
Thanks, Jamie.